Blue Bloods ran for 14 seasons and became one of the most beloved police procedurals in television history, with millions of fans tuning in every Friday night to watch the Reagan family navigate the morally complicated world of New York City law enforcement. But the version audiences watched was a carefully polished surface, and underneath it, behind the cameras and the closed-door production meetings, a completely different story was unfolding, one filled with controversy, close calls, real heartbreak, and decisions the network never wanted made public. Some of what happened behind the scenes was surprising, some of it was genuinely shocking, and a few of these revelations would have permanently changed the show had things gone even slightly differently. Start with the two young boys who played Danny Reagan's sons, because this one tends to stop people cold. Andrew and Tony Terracino, who portray Jack and Sean Reagan on the show, are brothers in real life, not just co-stars with good chemistry, but actual siblings who grew up together long before the cameras rolled. What makes it even stranger is that the age gap between their characters mirrors their real-life age gap almost exactly, a detail so precise it borders on deliberate. Tony, the elder of the two, had already built a small resume before Blue Bloods came along, lending his voice to the character Wilson in the animated television series Chuggington, which aired from 2008 to 2011, and that early experience in voice work sharpened his instincts in ways most viewers would never connect to the grounded world of a New York police drama. Andrew followed his brother into the industry, stepping into the role of Jack Reagan as his first major part, and the two of them essentially grew up on that set, aging alongside their characters in front of an audience that had no idea it was watching real siblings. Their genuine bond deepened every scene they shared, adding a layer of emotional truth that no amount of rehearsal can manufacture. As they moved into adulthood, their paths began separating, Tony showing academic interests that reach beyond acting, while Andrew expressed a desire to keep pursuing roles. But for over a decade, their presence quietly anchored some of the show's most emotionally resonant family storylines. Few things would have reshaped the identity of Blue Bloods more completely than its near relocation to Toronto, and this is where it gets genuinely unsettling for anyone who considers New York City inseparable from the show's DNA. The city is not just a backdrop in Blue Bloods, it functions as a character, with its borough-level texture, its recognizable precincts, and the lived-in quality of its streets feeding directly into the show's sense of place. During the early seasons, though, the financial weight of filming in one of the most expensive cities in the world pushed the production team into serious conversations about moving the entire operation to Canada. Toronto had long served as a cost-effective stand-in for New York on screen, offering urban architecture similar enough to fool most viewers, a strong production infrastructure, and tax incentives generous enough to make studio accountants genuinely interested. The debates were not casual. They extended long enough to represent a real threat to the show's New York identity. What ultimately kept the production in place was a combination of creative conviction, support from city officials, and access to film tax incentives that made staying financially viable. The team recognized that no camera trick or set construction could replicate what actual New York streets deliver naturally, and that decision ended up being one of the most consequential ever made for the show's long-term character. Amy Carlson's exit from Blue Bloods after the 7th season remains the most controversial moment in the show's run, and the way it unfolded left fans, fellow cast members, and Carlson herself with almost nothing in the way of closure. 7 seasons as Linda Reagan had established her as the emotional core of the Reagan family, warm, resilient, and deeply woven into Danny's storylines, which made the season 8 revelation all the more jarring. Linda had died in a helicopter crash, the show announced, and that death had happened entirely off-screen between seasons, with no farewell episode and no meaningful goodbye. The backlash arrived fast and loud, with viewers taking to social media in waves of frustration aimed less at the creative decision itself than at the manner of its execution. Carlson spoke publicly about her disappointment, making clear she had hoped for a storyline that honored the character's contributions and the years she had spent building her, and Donnie Wahlberg, who had worked alongside her for 7 seasons, voiced his own shock and sadness at how the situation was handled. The producers defended the choice as a narrative catalyst for Danny's character development in later seasons, and there is an argument to be made for that. But the audience had already delivered its verdict. Linda Reagan deserved a real ending, and the actress who created her deserved better than a brief mention in a season premiere. Long before Danny Reagan was pushing suspects against precinct walls in Brooklyn, the man behind the badge was performing choreographed routines on stage for thousands of screaming fans, and that contrast alone says something about how completely Donnie Wahlberg reinvented himself. As one of the original members of New Kids on the Block, the boy band that dominated American pop music through the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, Wahlberg had reached a kind of fame that most performers spend their entire careers chasing. The band split in 1994, and rather than coast on that history, Wahlberg turned toward acting with a focus that surprised much of the industry. He built his dramatic credentials steadily through film and television roles over the following years, and by the time Blue Bloods launched in 2010 on CBS, he arrived with both the technical skill and the emotional range that Danny Reagan demanded. His performance, intense, morally conflicted, fiercely protective of family, became one of the show's defining qualities, and viewers who discovered the series in its later seasons often have no idea that the man playing one of television's most uncompromising cops once performed dance routines in front of sold-out arenas. Few career reinventions in television history landed as cleanly as his. Tom Selleck's arrival on Blue Bloods as the Reagan patriarch brought with it decades of television history and one of the most recognized faces the medium had ever produced, and that recognition traces directly back to Magnum P.I. The show ran on CBS from 1980 to 1988, with Selleck playing Thomas Magnum, a charming private investigator operating out of Hawaii, and the role turned him into a cultural phenomenon almost immediately. In 1984, the Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series went to Selleck for that performance, a distinction that cemented his status as one of the defining television stars of his era. Thomas Magnum became so associated with Selleck's identity, the mustache, the Hawaiian shirts, the red Ferrari, that audiences carried those associations with them long after the show ended, which made his return to CBS decades later in Blue Bloods feel less like a comeback and more like a homecoming. That mustache, though, nearly did not survive the transition. During early production discussions for the first season, internal conversations surfaced about whether Selleck should shave it off, with the thinking being that it might age him beyond what the role required or carry too much of his Magnum P.I. identity into a new character. Selleck pushed back firmly, having worn the mustache for decades and considering it inseparable from his public image and his own sense of self. The decision ultimately landed at the network level, and CBS came down on Selleck's side. They wanted him to keep it, and looking at Frank Reagan now, the idea of that character without it feels almost impossible to take seriously. The mustache contributes something to the quiet authority Selleck projects in every scene that resists easy explanation but proves itself every time he appears on screen. The building used as Commissioner Frank Reagan's residence sits at 8070 Harbor View Terrace in the Bay Ridge neighborhood of Brooklyn, and it belongs, in real life, to Maronite Catholics, a Middle Eastern Christian community with centuries of history behind them. The property carries an air of permanence and dignity that suits Frank Reagan perfectly, a man built around tradition, discipline, and private faith, and its use as a real location rather than a constructed set reflects the show's broader commitment to placing its characters inside an authentic New York. Fans of the series occasionally make the trip to Bay Ridge simply to stand across from the building, which remains a private property, not open to visitors but visible from the street. Behind the accuracy of the show's police work sits a former NYPD detective named James Nuoro, who reviews scripts before filming begins and returns detailed notes aimed at keeping the procedural details as close to real-world law enforcement as a scripted drama can manage. On a typical 56-page script, Nuoro delivers between 5 and 10 pages of notes, adjusting jargon, correcting procedure, and sharpening dialogue in ways that register immediately with anyone who has actually worked in law enforcement. The result is a show that working police officers watch and respect, which separates Blue Bloods from most procedurals on television, where the technical details tend to be treated as decoration rather than substance. Len Cariou plays Henry Reagan, Frank's elderly father and the family's living repository of NYPD tradition, and the fact that Cariou is only 6 years older than Tom Selleck in real life is one of the show's best-kept secrets. Making that 6-year gap read as a full generation required sustained effort from the makeup and costume departments across every season, with aging techniques applied to Cariou's appearance and a wardrobe built around conservative traditional clothing that reinforced the impression of an elder statesman. The combination of craft and the actor's own considerable skill made it convincing enough that virtually no viewer ever questions the relationship on screen. Bridget Moynihan, who plays Erin Reagan on the series, has a film credit that connects her to one of the more unexpected action franchises of the past decade, and the role she played was small in screen time but enormous in emotional function. In the 2014 film John Wick, Moynihan appeared as Helen Wick, the recently deceased wife of the title character, and the entire narrative engine of that movie runs on the audience believing in the love John Wick carried for her. Helen's death arrives before the film even begins, communicated through flashbacks and video messages, and Moynihan delivered that brief performance with enough genuine warmth that the loss registered completely, giving the story the emotional foundation it needed to sustain everything that followed. The family dinner sequences that close nearly every episode of Blue Bloods are among the most beloved moments in the series, and the experience of filming them bears almost no resemblance to their finished warmth. With as many as 9 actors seated at the table simultaneously, capturing adequate coverage of every character requires an enormous number of camera setups, and the table must be fully reset between takes to maintain continuity. A process that stretches the filming of a single dinner scene to 5 hours or more on a regular basis. Moynihan tends to laugh through the tedium. Wahlberg has been known to disappear to a couch on the adjacent living room set in sleep. Selleck settled on the most practical solution of all. Rather than eating the food in front of him, he picks up a knife and butters his bread continuously during takes when the camera is on him, keeping his hands busy and his food props intact without consuming 5 hours' worth of dinner in the process. In 2014, an episode of Blue Bloods drew organized protest from the Catholic League, an organization that had previously praised the show as one of the few programs on American television that treated Catholicism with genuine respect. Frank Reagan's church-going habits and the Reagan family's religious faith had read for years as a counterpoint to how religion tends to get handled on network television. That changed when Frank delivered remarks suggesting the Catholic Church was behind the times on homosexuality, and the episode also featured a cardinal struggling with his own sexual identity alongside an openly gay nun. Catholic League President Bill Donahue publicly accused CBS of turning against its audience, and the episode made clear just how carefully Blue Bloods had always been threading a needle, depicting a devoutly Catholic family inside a complicated modern city, and how high the stakes were when that needle slipped.